License and registration.
Yep.
Now.
Officer, I'm still trying to understand why I was pulled over.
I said hand me your documents, ma'am.
You haven't given me a reason. My hands are right here.
Don't play games with me. You make one wrong move and this goes bad fast. Give me the license.
I'm not moving till you tell me why I'm stopped.
The last light of day was fading over the New Mexico horizon when everything changed for one police officer. It was a few minutes past 7 on a quiet stretch of state route outside Las Cruces, and what should have been a routine traffic stop was about to become a defining moment in modern policing. The encounter would last only 13 minutes, but the footage from that evening would eventually be viewed by tens of millions of people around the world. It would be dissected by legal experts, debated in courtrooms, and taught in police academies as a cautionary tale of what happens when authority meets knowledge. But this was not the kind of video that typically goes viral. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, no weapons drawn. Instead, what the world would witness was something far more unsettling for those who believe that a badge grants unlimited power. They would watch a young black woman, calm and composed, systematically dismantle an unlawful traffic stop using nothing but her words, her knowledge, and her unwavering belief in the Constitution. They would watch a veteran police officer, confident in his authority, slowly realize that he had made a terrible mistake. And they would watch as that realization dawned on him that everything he said and did was being recorded. This is the story of how a single traffic stop ended a 14-year law enforcement career, sparked a departmental overhaul, and became a symbol of what it means to truly know your rights. If you find yourself learning something new in this story, or if it makes you think differently about encounters with police, consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and there are many more to come. To understand what happened on that New Mexico highway, you first need to understand who was behind the wheel of that silver Honda Accord. Her name was Maya Richardson, and at 27 years old, she was unlike most people her age. While her peers were still searching for direction, Maya had found hers years ago. She was in her final semester at the University of New Mexico School of Law, and she was not merely surviving the rigorous program. She was thriving in ways that had become almost legendary among her classmates and professors. Maya held the highest academic standing in her graduating class, a position she had maintained since her first semester. She had authored 3 articles for respected legal journals, each one focused on constitutional protections against government overreach. Her professors had stopped being surprised when she raised her hand to offer corrections or deeper insights during lectures. One of them, a former federal prosecutor with 30 years of courtroom experience, once told a colleague that Maya understood the Fourth Amendment better than some sitting judges he had argued before. The Fourth Amendment was Maya's specialty, her obsession, her calling. For those unfamiliar with this particular piece of the Constitution, it represents one of the most fundamental protections Americans have against their own government. It declares that people have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. In practical terms, it means that police cannot simply stop you, search you, or arrest you because they feel like it. They need justification. They need what the law calls reasonable suspicion or probable cause, depending on what they want to do. Maya had spent 4 years immersing herself in every aspect of Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. She had read thousands of pages of case law, memorized landmark Supreme Court decisions, and analyzed how lower courts applied these principles in real-world situations. She understood the exceptions, the gray areas, the ways that law enforcement sometimes pushed boundaries. She knew where the lines were, and more importantly, she knew when those lines were being crossed. But Maya's expertise was not purely academic. Her interest in constitutional protections had a deeply personal origin. Growing up black in America, she had witnessed firsthand how differently the law could be applied depending on the color of someone's skin. She had watched her father, a successful accountant, get pulled over multiple times in their affluent neighborhood because he supposedly did not look like he belonged. She had seen the fear in her mother's eyes every time Maya or her brother left the house, the unspoken worry that something might happen during a routine encounter with police. These experiences had shaped her, driven her toward the law, and given her a burning desire to understand exactly what rights she possessed and how to defend them. On that particular Tuesday evening in late April, Maya was driving home from the law library at the university. She had spent the entire day preparing for her final examinations, which would begin in just 2 weeks. The sun was setting behind the Oregon mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape and painting the sky in shades of amber and deep purple. It was the kind of evening that reminded her why she loved living in the Southwest, despite everything. The air was cooling down from the afternoon heat, and Maya had her windows cracked open to let in the fresh desert breeze. Her radio was playing softly, tuned to a jazz station she had discovered during her first year of law school. The music helped her think, helped her process the complex legal concepts she had been studying all day. Maya was driving her silver Honda Accord, a reliable vehicle she had purchased used during her second year. It was nothing special to look at, just a practical sedan with current registration, properly displayed tags, and no distinguishing features that would attract attention. She was traveling at exactly 63 miles per hour in a 65 zone, staying well within the speed limit. Her headlights were on as required by state law. She was maintaining her lane perfectly, her hands positioned at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, her attention fully on the road ahead. There was absolutely nothing about her driving that warranted police attention. She was, in every measurable way, the model of a law-abiding motorist. And yet, when she glanced in her rear-view mirror and saw the unmistakable red and blue lights beginning to flash, something in her stomach tightened. It was not quite fear, though that was certainly part of it. It was more like recognition, a familiar feeling that had accompanied her through too many similar moments in her life. She had been here before, or somewhere like it, stopped for reasons that were never quite explained, questioned when there was nothing to question, treated with suspicion when she had done nothing suspicious. But this time was different. This time, Maya had something she had never possessed during previous encounters. She had 4 years of legal training, a mind full of case law, and an absolute certainty about where her constitutional rights began and where police authority ended. She activated her turn signal and smoothly pulled her vehicle onto the shoulder of the highway. Gravel crunched under her tires as she came to a complete stop. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, and placed both of her hands on the steering wheel in clear view. These actions were deliberate, practiced, part of a mental protocol she had developed over years of thinking about exactly this kind of situation. She wanted to minimize any excuse for escalation. She wanted everything she did to be calm, controlled, and captured clearly by whatever cameras were recording. As she waited for the officer to approach, Maya mentally reviewed her actions over the past several miles. She had not exceeded the speed limit at any point. She had not changed lanes erratically or failed to signal. She had not run any stop signs or rolled through any yield signs. Her vehicle was in perfect legal order. There was, quite simply, no legitimate reason for this stop. And she knew it. The officer who approached her driver's side window was named Derek Tanner. He was a white male in his mid-40s with a slightly weathered face that spoke to years of working under the harsh New Mexico sun. Derek had been with the Mesilla Valley Police Department for 14 years, a career that had earned him a reputation as a reliable, if unremarkable, member of the force. He had made thousands of traffic stops over those 14 years. He had issued tickets, made arrests, and conducted himself in ways that his supervisors had generally found acceptable. He considered himself good at his job, adept at reading people, at trusting his instincts about who belonged in certain places and who did not. On this particular evening, Derek was wearing his standard uniform, freshly pressed, with a body camera clipped to the center of his chest. The camera was recording, as it was required to be during all interactions with the public. This fact would prove crucial in the hours, days, and weeks that followed, though Derek did not yet appreciate how crucial. At that moment, he approached the silver Honda with the same confidence he brought to every traffic stop, secure in his authority, certain that the person behind the wheel would respond as most people did, with nervous compliance and minimal questions. He reached Maya's window and looked inside, his eyes taking in the interior of the vehicle and the young black woman behind the wheel. His face betrayed nothing, though his mind was already forming assessments, making judgments based on factors that had nothing to do with traffic law. Derek spoke first, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had issued commands thousands of times before. He said 2 words that countless motorists hear every day, words that begin an interaction that can go in any number of directions. He said, "License and registration." Maya did not immediately reach for her purse. She did not open her glove compartment. Instead, she kept her hands exactly where they were, clearly visible on the steering wheel, and she asked a simple question. She asked the officer to explain why he had pulled her over. This question, delivered calmly and without a trace of hostility, was the first indication Derek received that this stop would not proceed as he expected. Most people, when asked for their documents, simply provide them. They might ask questions afterward, or they might not ask questions at all, but very few people in Derek's experience declined to immediately comply while asking for justification first. Derek's response was to repeat his demand, this time with slightly more emphasis. He told Maya to provide her license and registration. Maya's voice remained steady, almost conversational, as she responded. She explained that she was legally entitled to know the reason for the stop. She asked what traffic violation the officer had observed that justified pulling her over. The body camera footage, which would later be viewed by millions of people, clearly captured the moment when Derek's demeanor began to shift. There was a subtle tightening around his jaw, a slight stiffening of his posture that suggested he was not accustomed to being questioned. His authority was being challenged, and he was not entirely sure how to respond. Derek told Maya that her lane position had appeared suspicious. Maya allowed herself a small pause before responding. The pause was not hesitation, but rather a moment of almost disbelieving recognition. She had expected something like this, some vague justification that sounded official, but meant nothing under the law. And here it was, exactly as predicted. She explained to Derek that suspicious lane position was not a violation under New Mexico traffic statutes. She asked him to be more specific about what violation he had actually observed, what law she had allegedly broken that gave him the right to initiate a traffic stop. Derek's hand moved toward his belt, a gesture that the body camera captured clearly. It was not a threatening movement, not yet. But it was the kind of unconscious action that police officers sometimes make when they feel their authority being challenged. It was a reminder, perhaps to himself as much as to anyone else, of the power he carried on his hip. He told Maya that he did not have to explain himself to her. He told her to provide her license and registration immediately, but Maya did not flinch. She did not reach for her documents. Instead, she calmly invoked a landmark Supreme Court case, explaining that under the legal precedent it established, officers were required to articulate reasonable suspicion before initiating a stop. She explained that suspicious was not articulable suspicion, that it was a feeling rather than a legal justification, and that feelings did not meet the constitutional threshold required for a lawful traffic stop. Let me pause here to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt you were being stopped or questioned without any legitimate reason? What did you do? How did it make you feel? Share your experience in the comments. These conversations matter, and hearing from others who have been there can help us all understand the scope of this issue. The moment Maya cited case law, the entire dynamic of the encounter shifted. Derek had made hundreds of traffic stops, but he had never encountered anything like this. He had stopped people who were angry, people who were scared, people who argued and shouted and demanded to speak with supervisors. But he had never stopped someone who calmly quoted Supreme Court decisions and explained exactly why his actions were constitutionally deficient. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Derek's face. He asked Maya if she was a lawyer. Maya's response was delivered without arrogance, without smugness, just a simple statement of fact. She told him she was a law student in her final semester, that she was first in her class, that she specialized in constitutional law, and that this stop violated her Fourth Amendment rights. Derek took a step back from the window, a physical retreat that mirrored the mental reassessment occurring inside his head. The body camera captured his hand moving toward his radio, then dropping back to his side, a gesture of indecision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small notepad that officers use to write citations, but he did not write anything. He simply held it, as if the physical object might restore some of the authority he could feel slipping away. After a moment of visible deliberation, Derek offered a new explanation for the stop. He told Maya that he had pulled her over because her vehicle matched the description of a suspicious vehicle that had been reported in the area. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, the only outward sign of the sharp, legal mind working behind them. She asked Derek several pointed questions in quick succession. What description? What area? What report number? And most critically, why had he not mentioned this when he first approached her window? The silence that followed was devastating. The body camera footage shows Derek standing beside Maya's car, notepad in hand, saying absolutely nothing for nearly 8 seconds. 8 seconds does not sound like a long time when you say it, but watch the footage. Count the seconds as they pass. In the context of a tense encounter where one person has challenged the authority of another, 8 seconds of silence is an eternity. It is the sound of someone realizing they have no good answers. Derek finally broke the silence by accusing Maya of being argumentative. Maya's response was measured and precise. She told Derek that she was not being argumentative. She was asking him to justify the stop with actual legal reasoning. She explained that was not argumentation but rather a constitutional requirement. She stated that he had made a stop and needed to articulate why. She informed him that if he could not provide that articulation, the stop was unlawful and any evidence that resulted from it would be inadmissible in court. Derek attempted to regain control of the situation by escalating it. He ordered Maya to step out of the vehicle. Maya remained completely still, her hands still visible on the steering wheel. She asked on what grounds she was being ordered out. Derek repeated his order, his voice harder now, more insistent. He told her he was ordering her to step out of the vehicle. Maya did not move. Instead, she asked a series of questions that cut to the heart of the encounter. She asked whether Derek had reasonable suspicion that she was armed. She asked whether he had probable cause to believe she had committed a crime. She asked whether he was escalating the stop simply because she was exercising her constitutional rights. The body camera captured the change in Derek's breathing. It became heavier, more audible, the sound of stress and uncertainty manifesting physically. He was beginning to understand something that most officers never have to confront during a traffic stop. He was wrong, and the person he had stopped knew he was wrong, and every word of this conversation was being recorded. Maya continued speaking, her voice never rising above a conversational tone, never taking on an emotional quality. She explained that when Derek had initiated the stop, he had begun what the law considers a Fourth Amendment seizure. She cited another legitimate reason to begin with. There is a moment in the footage that legal analysts would later highlight in their breakdowns. It occurs as Maya is explaining these concepts. Derek's face, partially visible in reflections on the car window, shows something that looks very much like fear. Not physical fear, not the kind of fear that comes from being in danger, but a deeper, more existential fear. The fear of someone who has realized they are completely outmatched, that they have made a serious mistake, and that there is no way to undo it. Derek spoke quietly, almost mumbling. He said he thought she might be right. Maya's response was immediate and firm. She said she knew she was right. Derek stepped back from the vehicle. He told Maya she could go, that she was free to leave. But Maya did not start her car. She did not put her hands back on the steering wheel and drive away, as most people would have. Instead, she did something that would prove crucial to everything that followed. She opened her car door and stepped out onto the shoulder of the highway, not because Derek had ordered her to, but because she chose to. She stood beside her vehicle with complete composure, the desert wind stirring her hair, the dying sunlight casting long shadows across the pavement. She told Derek that they were not finished. Derek looked genuinely unsettled now. He repeated that she was free to go, his voice carrying a note that might have been pleading. Maya explained what she needed before she left. She told Derek she required his badge number and the name of his station. She told him this information was absolutely necessary because he had just violated her constitutional rights. She listed his transgressions clearly and systematically: an unlawful stop, an attempt to intimidate her into compliance, multiple changes in his justification for the stop which suggested racial profiling. She reminded him that everything that had transpired was captured on his body camera. She told him she needed his badge number, his full name, and his station. The highway was quiet around them, the only sounds the distant hum of occasional traffic and the soft whisper of wind across the desert landscape. The sun had nearly set, and the flashing lights from Derek's patrol vehicle cast alternating red and blue shadows across both of their faces. Derek provided the information she requested. His badge number was 5237. His full name was Derek Allen Tanner. He worked out of the Mesilla Valley Police Department Central Division. Maya took out her phone and recorded everything. She thanked Derek and informed him of what would happen next. She would be filing a formal complaint. She would be requesting all body camera and dashboard camera footage from this stop through an official records request. And she informed him that if the department attempted to deny her request, she would file a public records lawsuit in state court. She told him she knew exactly how to do it. Derek said nothing in response. The body camera recorded his silence, his stillness, the posture of a man who understood that his career had just changed direction in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. Maya got back into her car, started the engine, and drove away into the gathering darkness. The entire encounter had lasted 13 minutes. 13 minutes that would reshape Derek's life, Maya's future, and the policies of an entire police department. Most people who experience an unjust encounter with police respond in predictable ways. They complain to family members over dinner. They vent to friends at work. Some might write an angry post on social media, hoping their story will resonate with others who have experienced similar treatment. A few might fill out a complaint form, knowing in their hearts that nothing will likely come of it. But Maya Richardson was not most people. She was a law student with 4 years of rigorous legal training and access to resources that the average citizen simply does not possess. She understood how the system worked, how complaints were processed, how evidence was evaluated, and how to construct an argument that could not be ignored. The morning after the traffic stop, Maya went to the university law library. She had exams to prepare for, a graduation to anticipate, a career to build. But she set all of that aside because she understood that what had happened the previous evening was bigger than her personal schedule. She had an opportunity to create consequences to ensure that what Derek had done to her could not be quietly forgotten. Over the next several hours, Maya crafted a document that was unlike any complaint the Mesilla Valley Police Department had ever received. She did not simply fill out the standard form, checking boxes and writing a brief narrative description. Instead, she prepared a comprehensive legal brief that systematically outlined every violation that had occurred during the traffic stop. She cited case law from the Supreme Court and lower federal courts, demonstrating exactly why Derek's actions had violated established constitutional principles. She referenced the department's own policy manual, which she had obtained through a public records request months earlier for a different academic project. She quoted the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, explaining how both applied to the circumstances of her stop. She created a detailed timeline of the encounter, cross-referenced with what she anticipated would be shown on the body camera footage once she obtained it through formal channels. Her complaint was not a complaint in the ordinary sense. It was a legal argument, meticulously constructed and professionally presented. It was the kind of document that a seasoned civil rights attorney might spend days preparing. Maya had created it in a single morning. She submitted the document to the Mesilla Valley Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. But she did not stop there. She sent copies to the department's legal counsel, ensuring that the lawyers who advised the police would be aware of what had happened. She sent copies to the city attorney's office, making certain that municipal officials understood a constitutional violation had occurred under their jurisdiction. She sent copies to the regional chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, knowing that civil rights organizations tracked patterns of police misconduct. She wanted multiple entities to have documentation of what had transpired. She wanted to create a paper trail that could not be quietly buried. The police department received Maya's complaint on a Friday. By the following Monday afternoon, Derek Tanner had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. This timeline was extraordinary. Police internal investigations typically move slowly, taking weeks or months merely to begin substantive review. But Maya's complaint was so detailed, so legally sound, so meticulously documented that the department had no choice but to act immediately. They could not ignore it. They could not downplay it. They had to treat it with the seriousness it demanded. What do you think about how the department responded? Was placing Derek on leave the right move, or should they have done something differently? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Internal Affairs assigned the case to a veteran investigator named Sergeant Michelle Ortega. Michelle had been with the department for 25 years and had investigated hundreds of officer conduct complaints over her career. She had seen everything from minor policy violations to serious criminal misconduct. She had developed a reputation for fairness and thoroughness, for following the evidence wherever it led, regardless of who that evidence might implicate. When Michelle first read Maya's complaint, she understood immediately that this case was different from anything she had handled before. The level of detail, the legal precision, the systematic documentation of constitutional violations set it apart from the typical complaints that crossed her desk. Most complaints were emotional expressions of frustration, understandable but lacking specificity. This was something else entirely. This was a legal argument that anticipated counterarguments and addressed them preemptively. Michelle's first step was to obtain the body camera footage from Derek's patrol vehicle. She sat down in her office, closed the door, and watched the recording from beginning to end. Then she watched it again, taking notes. Then she brought in the department's legal advisor and watched it a third time, pausing at key moments to discuss their implications. The footage confirmed everything Maya had written in her complaint. It showed Derek making a stop without being able to articulate reasonable suspicion. It showed him changing his justification multiple times when challenged. It showed him attempting to use his authority to intimidate a citizen who was simply asserting her constitutional rights. It showed him ordering Maya out of the vehicle without any legal basis for the command. And it showed the moment, unmistakable and damning, when he essentially admitted he was wrong. But there was something else in the footage that elevated the seriousness of the case beyond what Maya herself might have realized. At one point during the encounter, while Maya was calmly explaining constitutional law, Derek's right hand had drifted toward his service weapon. The movement was subtle, lasting only a moment, and Derek had not actually touched the weapon or made any move to draw it. But the motion was there, captured clearly by the body camera, suggesting that some part of Derek's mind had considered reaching for his gun in response to a citizen correctly reciting legal precedent. Michelle interviewed Derek 5 days after the incident. The interview took place in a small conference room at the Central Division Station, with Derek seated across the table from Michelle and the department's legal advisor. Derek had been advised of his rights under department policy and understood that the interview was part of a formal investigation. Michelle began with the basic question that should have had a simple answer. She asked Derek why he had initiated the stop. Derek's response echoed what he had told Maya on the highway. He said he had thought her lane position appeared suspicious. Michelle pressed further. She asked what made it suspicious specifically. Derek struggled to provide a concrete answer. He said it had just seemed off, that something about how she was driving had not looked right. Michelle asked whether Maya had crossed lane markers at any point. Derek admitted she had not. Michelle asked whether she had swerved or drifted. Derek acknowledged she had not done that either. Michelle asked whether there had been any erratic driving behavior of any kind. Anything that might have suggested impairment or distraction or recklessness. Derek conceded that there had not been. Michelle waited, allowing the silence to build. Then she asked the question that had been implicit throughout the interview. She asked Derek why, if there had been no traffic violations and no erratic behavior, he had decided to pull Maya over. Derek was quiet for a long moment before answering. When he spoke, his words would prove to be the most consequential of his career. He said that Maya had looked like she did not belong in that area. Michelle's expression did not change, but she made a note on her pad. She asked Derek to explain what he meant by that statement. She asked him to articulate what about Maya had suggested she did not belong. Derek could not provide a coherent answer. He mentioned instinct, mentioned his experience as an officer, mentioned a feeling he had developed over years of patrol work, but he could not point to any specific, articulable factor that would have justified his suspicion under the law. Michelle closed her notebook and ended the interview. She had everything she needed. The investigation moved forward with unusual speed. Michelle reviewed Derek's personnel file and found that Maya's complaint was not the first of its kind. Over his 14-year career, Derek had accumulated a pattern of complaints from Black and Hispanic drivers who had been stopped under questionable circumstances. These earlier complaints had been investigated individually and had not resulted in serious consequences. But when viewed together, examined as a pattern rather than isolated incidents, they painted a troubling picture of an officer who made enforcement decisions based on factors other than observed violations. 17 days after the traffic stop, the department concluded its investigation. The findings were unambiguous. Derek had violated multiple department policies and procedures. He had initiated a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion of a violation. He had failed to articulate a legitimate legal basis for his actions. He had demonstrated bias in his enforcement decisions. The evidence suggested a pattern of pretextual stops based on racial profiling. The department recommended termination. Derek was given the opportunity to contest the findings through the internal appeals process. Instead, he chose to resign from the Mesilla Valley Police Department, effective immediately. He did not fight the findings. He did not request a hearing. He simply submitted his resignation letter and walked away from a career that had spanned 14 years and thousands of traffic stops. Just like that, it was over for Derek Tanner. Or rather, just like that, his career in law enforcement was over. The consequences of those 13 minutes on a desert highway would follow him much further. But the story was not finished. The body camera footage remained, and Maya had not forgotten her promise to obtain it. Initially, the department resisted releasing the footage to the public. They cited ongoing investigation concerns. Even though the investigation had concluded, they raised privacy arguments related to Derek's personnel matters. They suggested that releasing the footage might discourage other officers from cooperating with body camera programs. Maya responded by filing a public records lawsuit in state district court. She represented herself because she did not need an attorney. She was as capable as any attorney at constructing legal arguments and navigating court procedures. Her lawsuit argued that the body camera footage constituted a public record under New Mexico law and that citizens had a fundamental right to see how their police department operated. She cited relevant statutes, referenced controlling case law, and anticipated the department's counterarguments with preemptive rebuttals. The judge ruled in Maya's favor within 3 weeks. The department was ordered to release the footage. When the video became publicly available, it spread across the internet with remarkable speed. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times on various platforms. Within a week, that number had grown to nearly 15 million. News organizations across the country picked up the story. Legal commentators dissected the footage frame by frame. Law professors began incorporating it into their curricula as a teaching example. Civil rights organizations circulated it as evidence of ongoing problems in American policing. The public reaction was divided, as public reactions to these kinds of videos often are. Many people praised Maya for her courage, her composure, and her knowledge. They admired the way she had stood her ground without ever raising her voice or becoming aggressive. They pointed to her conduct as a model for how citizens could assert their rights while minimizing the risk of escalation. Others criticized her, accusing her of being difficult or confrontational. They argued that she should have simply complied with Derek's requests and filed a complaint afterward. They suggested that her insistence on immediate answers had been unnecessarily provocative. But here is what no one could dispute, regardless of their perspective on Maya's choices. Every single legal claim she made during that traffic stop was accurate. Every case she cited was correctly applied. Every constitutional argument was sound. She had not merely asserted her rights. She had demonstrated a deeper understanding of those rights than the officer who was supposedly enforcing the law. This is one of the most important lessons of this story. The badge does not automatically confer knowledge. The uniform does not automatically make someone right. Authority and expertise are not the same thing, and sometimes the person being stopped knows far more than the person doing the stopping. After the footage went viral, other people began coming forward with complaints about Derek. Several Black and Latino drivers reported that they had been stopped by him over the years under circumstances similar to what Maya had experienced. They had been pulled over without explanation, questioned without cause, made to feel like criminals when they had done nothing wrong. Some of them had filed complaints with the department at the time. Those complaints had been investigated individually and had not resulted in significant consequences. But now, in the aftermath of Maya's case, those earlier complaints were being reviewed again. The pattern that Michelle Ortega had identified during her investigation was being examined more closely. Questions were being asked about why the department had not recognized this pattern earlier, why warning signs had been missed, why it had taken a viral video to expose what the documentation already suggested. The Mesilla Valley Police Department announced a series of reforms in response to the incident. They implemented enhanced training on constitutional law, requiring all officers to complete coursework on the Fourth Amendment and the legal standards for traffic stops. They revised their policies on vehicle stops, adding requirements for documentation and supervisory review. They brought in outside experts to evaluate their practices and recommend improvements. They created an early warning system designed to identify officers who accumulated patterns of complaints so that intervention could occur before situations escalated to the level of what had happened with Derek. Some people argued that these reforms did not go far enough, that they were cosmetic changes designed to manage public relations rather than address systemic problems. Others argued that they were an overreaction, that one viral video should not drive policy changes for an entire department. The debate continues to this day. Maya graduated from law school 2 months after the traffic stop. She finished first in her class, as everyone who knew her had expected. She had job offers from prestigious law firms across the country, firms that could offer her starting salaries well into 6 figures and paths to partnership and influence. She had offers from government agencies that were looking for bright legal minds to help shape policy. She had offers from corporations that wanted her skills on their side in litigation and compliance matters. She turned all of them down. Instead, Maya accepted a position with a nonprofit legal organization that specializes in representing people who have been wronged by law enforcement. She handles cases involving unlawful stops, false arrests, excessive force, and police misconduct. She works with clients who often cannot afford private attorneys, people who might otherwise have no recourse when their rights are violated. She provides them with the same level of legal expertise that she displayed on that highway in New Mexico, the same meticulous attention to constitutional principles, the same unwavering commitment to accountability. In interviews, Maya has spoken about what drove her to make this choice. She has explained that the traffic stop with Derek was not the first time she had been racially profiled. It was not the first time she had been pulled over for no legitimate reason. It was not the first time she had felt the weight of suspicion falling on her simply because of what she looked like. But it was the first time she had the legal knowledge to fight back in the moment, to assert her rights in real time, to force accountability from someone who had violated those rights. And she realized that most people do not have that knowledge. Most people do not spend 4 years studying constitutional law. Most people cannot cite Supreme Court cases from memory or explain the legal standards for a valid traffic stop. Most people, when confronted by an officer who is violating their rights, have no choice but to comply and hope for the best. Maya decided to spend her career being the person who helps those people. She decided to use the knowledge and privilege she had acquired to create accountability for those who would otherwise have none. This brings us to the larger significance of what happened on that New Mexico highway. This story is not merely about one law student and one police officer. It is about power and knowledge and the relationship between them. It is about what happens when someone who is supposed to be subject to authority turns out to understand that authority better than the person wielding it. Consider for a moment what Derek believed when he made that stop. He believed that his badge gave him the right to pull over anyone he wanted. He believed that his experience as an officer was sufficient justification for his actions. He believed that the person behind the wheel would be intimidated by his uniform and his authority, and would comply without asking questions. These beliefs had been reinforced over 14 years of traffic stops that had proceeded exactly as he expected. Now consider what Maya knew. She knew that the Constitution places limits on government power, including the power of police officers. She knew that those limits are not suggestions but requirements, enforceable by courts and binding on law enforcement. She knew that reasonable suspicion is not a feeling or a hunch, but a specific legal standard that must be met before certain actions can be taken. She knew that she had the right to ask questions, the right to refuse consent, the right to document what was happening and hold people accountable. The collision between Derek's beliefs and Maya's knowledge produced a moment of profound revelation. The body camera captured it, the internet disseminated it, and millions of people witnessed something that challenged their assumptions about how power operates in America. Here is what I want you to think about as we approach the end of this story. What if you were in Maya's situation? What would you do? Would you have the knowledge to recognize when your rights were being violated? Would you have the composure to assert those rights calmly and clearly? Would you have the courage to press for accountability, knowing the risks that such a stance might entail? These are not hypothetical questions for many people. These are questions that arise in real life, during real encounters with real consequences. And the answer for most people is that they do not have the knowledge Maya possessed. They do not know the legal standards that police must meet. They do not know what reasonable suspicion means or how it differs from probable cause. They do not know that they have the right to refuse consent to searches or that they can decline to answer questions beyond providing basic identification. This lack of knowledge creates an imbalance of power. It allows officers who do not fully understand or do not fully respect constitutional limits to act with impunity. It leaves citizens vulnerable to violations they cannot identify, let alone challenge. It perpetuates a system where accountability is the exception rather than the rule. Maya's story offers a different possibility. It shows that knowledge can be a form of power, that understanding your rights can change the dynamic of an encounter, that citizens are not helpless before authority when they understand the boundaries of that authority. It does not mean that every encounter will end the way Maya's did. It does not mean that asserting your rights will always lead to accountability or that challenging an officer is without risk. But it demonstrates that outcomes are not predetermined, that the badge does not automatically win, that knowledge can be the difference between submission and resistance. Let me be clear about something important. This story is not an invitation to confront police officers recklessly or to escalate situations unnecessarily. Maya did not shout at Derek. She did not insult him. She did not threaten him. She remained calm and professional throughout the entire encounter, even as she firmly asserted her rights. Her composure was essential to the outcome. Had she become emotional or aggressive, the situation might have developed very differently. The lesson is not that you should argue with police officers. The lesson is that you should know your rights, understand when those rights are being violated, and have the information necessary to make informed decisions about how to respond. Sometimes that might mean complying in the moment and pursuing accountability afterward. Sometimes it might mean asserting your rights in real time, as Maya did. The right choice depends on circumstances that vary from situation to situation. But you cannot make story resonated with you. Consider subscribing for more accounts like this one. These stories matter. They illuminate the way power operates in our society and the ways that ordinary people can push back against injustice. Every view, every comment, every subscription helps ensure that these conversations continue. This is the story of how a black law student on a New Mexico highway taught a veteran officer the law he was supposed to enforce. But it is more than that. It is a story about what it means to know your rights in a country where those rights are constantly being tested. It is a story about the difference between having authority and deserving it. It is a story about a 13-minute encounter that will be remembered and studied and debated for years to come. And it is a reminder to all of us that the most powerful weapon against injustice is not anger or force or even courage, though all of those things have their place. The most powerful weapon is knowledge, the kind of knowledge that Maya Richardson carried with her on that highway, the kind of knowledge that turned an unlawful stop into a career-ending moment, the kind of knowledge that can transform vulnerability into strength. That knowledge is available to anyone willing to learn. The question is whether we will take the time to acquire it.